Let's talk about mental blocks in the pole vault, what they are, why they exist, and how to overcome them. Warning, this video is going to have a ton of information. I'm going to share with you a couple examples of what mental blocks might look like. I'm going to go into the science of what's happening in the brain and the body during a mental block. Then I'm going to talk about the science behind the why this is affecting your pole vaulting. Then at the end, I'm going to show you ways to get out of your mental block. And then I'll share a bonus 3 more ways that help with mental blocks and sports psychology type stuff. So before we get rocking and rolling, if you are going through a mental block right now, I am sorry. They're not fun. It sucks. But I want you to know, and I really, really mean this, and I've seen it happen, that things can get better. And hopefully by the end of this video, your pockets are going to be full of tools and directions of how to navigate your mental block if you're in one. You're awesome. Let's go. So mental blocks in the pole vault can look like all sorts of different things. You could be running through. You could be freezed on the runway, like you feel like you just can't move. You could swing half of your jump and then bail. You freeze at big meets. There's all sorts of different symptoms of a mental block. And I say symptoms because what we're going to talk about next is what's actually causing those symptoms. At its simplest form, our brains and our body want us to be safe. We want to survive and reproduce so we can survive in the next generation. At simplest form, that's what we're trying to do. And so we need to know 2 things. The first is that there's this little itty bitty part of our brain about the size of an almond called the amygdala. And I like to think of it as like a watchtower. It scans for danger and threats. And when it sees one, it creates a flight, fight, or freeze response. And this is part of your sympathetic nervous system. So it just happens automatically. Like, for example, if you were to lift up a board and you saw a snake, you wouldn't go, well, that's a snake. It feels like it could be poisonous. Maybe I should jump and run. No, you just jump automatically because that's your body and brain's way to protect you. The amygdala helps you do that. It sees a threat. It might not even be poisonous. It might be a garter snake, but it errs on the side of protecting you and makes you go flight, fight, or freeze. And in this case with the snake example, we flight, right? We jump away. Now, if we were to fight, we'd punch that snake in the face and show it what's up, but that's how we do. We need to know that the amygdala scans for threats, and if it sees a threat, it sends a flight, fight, or freeze response. The second thing we need to know is that our brains have neurons, and these neurons, I'll pull up an image here so you can see what an actual neuron looks like. It's pretty cool, but think of them as information pathways. They share information. It's like little roads with cars on them, right? So the neurons are the roads and the information are like the cars moving along. They create neural networks, neural pathways. And my favorite way to think about these is if you were in a sled, right, on a snowy hill and you slid down the hill, you would leave a groove in the snow. It won't be very deep yet, but if you went down the groove again, that groove would get deeper. And the more you slide down that groove, the deeper that groove gets. And if you start sledding in a different spot, but you get towards that groove, it's going to be easy to fall into it and go down that groove again. Neurons work the same way, as in if we use that same neural pathway over and over and over again, it becomes automatic in a way. It's easier for it to be activated, and we use that road, that pathway, more than a different one. Does that make sense? Bear with me, this is all going to tie together with mental blocks, but I'm going to give you one more example so you can actually feel a neuron connecting and then feel it getting stronger as you go. So I want everyone to take your thumb and stick it up like you're giving me a thumbs up, and I want you to point at me. Now I just want you to switch your fingers and your thumbs, and then I want you to switch it again. And maybe it just doesn't work right away, right? Because you're creating a new neural pathway. But the more you do it, the stronger and easier it gets. And then pretty soon, I've been doing this talk for a long time, so I don't even have to think about it anymore. I can just rock and roll, you know? But that's a neural network connecting and then strengthening as we practice it more. One more little bonus side note, this is how practice works too. A lot of people call this muscle memory. Practice makes perfect, right? But they also say perfect practice makes perfect. Because if we practice something the wrong way, we're gonna strengthen that neural connection, that habit that we don't want, and it can become worse. But if we strengthen a habit that we do want, a pattern that we do want, like planting on time or, finishing a swing in the pole vault, then we don't have to think about it anymore. It just happens because that groove gets really deep. All right, let's go back. I'm going to tie this all together in mental blocks now. So what can happen in the pole vault a lot of times is something strange or unexpected happens. It could be an injury, it could be a pole that's too big, it could be a competition that something happened, weird weather, winds, it could be all sorts of different things. And when that happens while you're pole vaulting, that information from that event goes through your neurons and talks to the amygdala, and the amygdala goes, this information is scary. It seems dangerous and threatening. I'm gonna send a flight, fight, or freeze response out to protect you from that happening again. And because it did that, every time you do something similar to that event, pole vault, your brain literally sees pole vaulting as a threat. So every time you go to do this movement, this pattern, this thing, that flight, fight, or freeze is activated by the amygdala, and like we said, you either fight, or you could freeze. It could be all sorts of different things, but it's really hard to pole vault when your brain sees pole vaulting as a threat. And that groove idea is important because if it was something really big, say you fell into the box and broke your femur, that is a huge event that happened. And instead of sledding down the hill, it might be like a giant beam fell into the snow and dashed a huge groove in there. Every time I fall into that groove, a flight or fight response is activated from the amygdala and I feel fear. Or if you run through, because it was just like a weird day in the weather, but you kept trying to run through, you slid over that groove maybe 20 times in practice, and then it got pretty deep, and now you created a habit, a groove where you fall into it, and the amygdala sees pole vaulting as a threat, as a fear, as a way where you're unsafe, so it's going to try and protect you from anything happening. Does that make sense? Are we following? I know this can be a lot. I'm going to share one more thing that's incredibly important, and then I'm going to share with you my favorite way to help with mental blocks, and then 3 bonus ones at the end. With this idea, something that's often overlooked by coaches, especially older coaches, is that anything that is seen as a threat can activate that amygdala. And the one that's overlooked is emotional threats. I'm just going to share one story here. There was a girl I was coaching maybe 10 years ago, and every time she PR'd, her parents would give her $100 bill. Every time a PR bar came up, just everything got different. She got a little stiffer. She ran through. It just didn't work. And then when she looked at her parents, it was just pure disappointment, always. And when I talked to her later, by her senior year, she opened up about it. And she goes, I don't get excited for the $100. I get scared of seeing that look on my parents' face if it doesn't work out. Oh. And so while I do see what the parents were trying to do, I think there was good intentions there. What it was actually doing was it was creating a fear of PRs because she didn't feel emotionally safe if she didn't make it. She didn't feel good enough, she told me. She didn't feel like her parents cared if she feel like her parents didn't care about her unless she PR'd. And there's a bunch of ways of how you can not feel emotionally safe, doing your sport or life in general. But feeling like you're letting your parents or your coach down, your team down, being harshly criticized, fear of not being good enough. There's all sorts of different ones. But as coaches, if you're watching this, just be aware that that can be a pretty big one. And this is where I talk a lot about the process versus the product. If people are very focused on the product, the outcome, versus the process, this is where those emotional things can happen. So, all right, let's figure out ways to get out of a mental block. What I share with a lot of people that's super effective is just creating a new groove, right? Sounds so simple when we understand this whole groove neural pathway amygdala idea, right? So we find a new place to sled, and we want to keep sledding where the amygdala is not activated. And in doing this, we teach our brains and our bodies that the pole vault is not a threat. So here's my formula that I've been sending out for years. Find settings that work every time. It's like your money settings. Grip, pull, and run. It might be gripping at 7 feet, running from one left. It doesn't matter. We just need a starting point where we can start sledding. From there, do 10 vaults in a row, 10 successful vaults in a row. And if we get to number 9 and then 10 we run through, or we go back to, one of those mental block symptoms, start over, do 10 again. If you can't get to 10, do a setting less and do one where you can do 10. And keep in mind, our goal is not to pole vault higher right now. Our goal is to create a new groove. And it takes a while to get a groove in the snow. It's gonna take a while to get that groove in your brain. So be patient and have fun with it. From there, once you get 10 in a row, change one setting, only one of those 3 settings. For your grip, don't grip any higher than 3 inches at a time. If you change your pole setting, don't move up a pole bigger than 5 pounds at a time. If you change your run, don't move back farther than 1 left at a time. You gotta get 10 in a row with those new settings and then wash and repeat these 5 settings. If something doesn't work, move back down to the other setting. We can stay on the bunny hill for a while, and keep mastering this groove, this path. Don't worry about it. Eventually you're gonna get to a point where you're like, man, this is easy. I'm gonna move back and up. I am fixed. That's awesome. I'm happy you feel that way. That means we're gaining confidence instead of fear, Our flight or fight response is being activated. But stay on course. Keep doing what we're doing because it's working. Just stay on course. Slow progressions are the best progressions. Over time, as we're building this new groove, that old one that was causing us all those troubles, since we're not sledding in it anymore, it'll start to fill up with snow to the point where it'll be harder to fall back into it, or to the point where it might not even be there anymore at all. So when we understand this, it really makes you go, oh, nothing's really wrong with you. Everything's happening the way it's supposed to happen, right? Our brains just got convinced that pole vault is not safe. And our job now to overcome these mental blocks is just to remind ourselves, remind our brains and our bodies that pole vault is safe. All right, I want to give you 3 more bonus mental health things. The first one, in my book, The Pole Vault Toolbox, I talk about the most common ways mental blocks are created in the pole vault. I haven't really looked at other sports, but this is pole vault related, and this is a pole vault video, but it is progressing too quickly. And the 3 ways we usually kind of screw up progressing too quickly in the pole vault are those settings again. We take our grip and we move it up too quickly. We move back our run too fast. We have too much speed. And the last one is just moving up a pole that's too big, too fast. So here are my rules. I'm literally gonna read it word for word out of the book. Number 1, the rule of 3. Never change settings, grip, pull, or run until the vaulter does it at least 3 times in a row. And that's so we can create that groove and make it a little deeper so it's easier to fall into. If we just sled down the hill 1 time, it's easy to pop out. 2, use small adjustments with the run, grip, and pull. So when you make adjustments for the run, no more than 1 left or 2 steps back at a time, and no more than 3 inches in movements on the runway at a time. And that 3-inch idea is for the takeoff step and moving yourself on the runway to fine tune it. For the grip, no more than 3 inches at a time. And I tend to move like 1 inch at a time, and that's why I mark all my poles. And when moving to a longer pole, keep the grip the same for the first jump. I'll talk more about this later. When we're adjusting a pole settings, move up 5 pounds at a time if you can. I know this isn't an option for every school, and getting a good line of poles is hard, but that's ideal situation. The least amount of pounds you can move up at a time, keeping the length the same. When we're moving poles, only move up 6 inches in pole at a time. So don't move up like a 14 to a 15, maybe a 14 to a 14.6. The last one for the pole is when moving to a longer pole, which is typically 6 inches, 15 centimeters longer, keep the grip the same, but drop down 10 pounds in weight. So for example of this, if an athlete is on a 13.150, I would move my athlete to a 13.6 140 for the first jump. And that's because earlier in this book, we talked about how 3 inches of grip is roughly 5 pounds of pole, so we're trying to keep the progression, the next step, as close as we can. And number 3, my vaulters only get 3 run-throughs or no swing jumps before we make a change. And this is again what we were talking about throughout this whole video of creating grooves. We can create grooves that are unhelpful for us, and we can create grooves that are helpful for us. I will let someone play up to 3 times before we make a change, or I get worried about those unhelpful grooves. So that's all in the pole vault toolbox. All right, let's do 2 more things that can help you with mental blocks and sports psychology stuff performing better. So I created these wristbands, not just because they're cool, how you use them can be incredibly powerful. And every time you get one of these wristbands, it comes with this card that gives you 3 ideas on how to use it on and off the pole vault runway, or in sports or in life in general. The first one is called box breathing, and this band was literally called the box breathing wristband. This is a pretty common breathing technique to help you reduce that flight, fight, or freeze response and allow you to perform in a more calm, balanced way. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4, just like a box, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, and repeat this process. It's literally written on the back of this wristband. It works for sports and everything, but that's box breathing. You can do it on every band. Other people have done it that I have written on my thing is they use this little square here and they just do laps around the owl. So another one you can do is it's called switching wrists. The whole idea is it's about creating a new groove with neuroplasticity. It's called your brain can literally change just like you can adapt your muscles, you can adapt your brain. By switching wrists, you can recognize an old groove and then create a new one. That's essentially how switching wrists works. And then grounding, this is a technique that is used a lot with people with PTSD. So it's just bringing awareness to your senses. So what that does is it helps shift the attention away from the overwhelming thought in your head, and it brings you back into the present moment. So a lot of times we have thoughts that aren't happening, right? Some of them might not even be real. We might have amazing imaginations and it's just not happening. So by bringing the attention back to the moment, to our senses, which are anchored in the moment, or our breath, it also reduces anxiety and gets you out of that flight, fight, or freeze response. So there really is truth to living in the moment. So that's wristbands. I'm gonna give you one more thing, all right? One more thing. Last but not least, a good sports psychologist can do wonders. Robert Andrews is the best pole vault sports psychologist I know. Not just pole vault, he's a fantastic sports psychologist. One of my favorite human beings on the planet, and he's helped a lot of pole vaulters. When people ask me and if I know any good sports psychologists, I always send them to Robert Andrews first.
We teach visualization and breathing like everybody in my field does, but
Yeah.
we're more of a whole person approach. You know, we look at character and integrity and personal responsibility. You know, I think those are important factors.
And there's a bunch of very, very, very good pole vaulters who have worked with him. He's worked with Simone Biles too. So yeah, he's really good. So what I would recommend first, I created 3 podcasts with Robert Andrews so far. We're working on more. So if you type into any of your favorite podcast platforms,
We really look at authenticity. You know, how are you showing up? Are you giving your power away to someone to fit in or belong? Or you're not speaking up when you need to speak up? So we really work on helping athletes develop what we call this authentic self, so they feel empowered. And because I've never seen a disempowered athlete reach their full potential.
listen to him, see if you like what he says, and if you do, give him a call. There's information of how to contact him down in the description below and in the podcast. And he does Zoom meetings, he talks over the phone, he does clinics for teams, and if you're in Texas, you can go see him in his office. And not just Robert Andrews, a good sports psychologist can do wonders, because it's just like having a good coach, or a normal psychologist can help with that as well. It's okay to get help. I've been hospitalized twice for mental health, and it wasn't fun at the time, but when I look back, it's 2 of the best things that ever happened to me in my entire life. I told you that was going to be a lot, so I hope this was very helpful. Let me know what you think down in the comments. If one of those tools sings better to you, let me know. I'd like to know what works for you. Team-Hoot.com for the wristbands and the book. There's actually new wristbands on the way. I'm really excited for them. I made them all myself, you know? I don't even know what I'm doing. I had to learn how to do Illustrator. All right, guys and gals. I love you. I'm happy you made it this far. And remember, there's more than one way to pole vault. I will see you in the next one. And I find this absolutely fascinating because your brain's literally just trying to protect you. And pole vaulting isn't like something that's going to help you survive or reproduce unless you're Mondo Blooper. No, but seriously.
Are you ready for it? Watch this. Can you feel